Hi, and welcome to the next episode of the Basstravaganza.
Hi, as you can see by this video, Old Man Winter rode into Dodge looking for trouble, and he kicked Summer's butt right out of town. So the winter monsoon has arrived again, and maybe it's time for me to sit down and publish another episode of the Basstravaganza. It's year 2 of the COVID New World Order, and I'm still here, and I hope you're still hanging in there too. This extended rant that became episode 29 was intended to be just an introduction to the next real episode, which is about fly fishing in the interior. But the rant got longer and longer, and I'm going to publish it separately here. There's no fishing in this one. It's really only intended for a few people, just as a clarification about what I'm trying to do and where it's all heading. So if it's fishing that you're looking for, wait for the following episodes, which will be posted shortly. The past year and a half have been a struggle for everybody, but it's certainly not the end of the world, not here in Nanaimo. In spite of all our troubles, it looks like the biggest economic boom in history here in many ways. Every vacant lot that's been covered in weeds for the past 20 or 30 years is suddenly getting dug up and converted into huge new buildings, and freeway traffic is busier than ever, and Walmart and Costco parking lots are crowded again, and they're clear cutting and shipping more raw logs off the island faster than ever before. So it's the greatest of times for some. And at the same time, normal government services are getting harder to deliver, and our basic healthcare system is collapsing. So before I babble on any further, let me begin with a shout out to anyone out there on the front lines of the medical services who has not already quit from the stress. Thank you for showing up and doing your work. So I want to give a shout out once again to anyone who's in assisted living or extended care or lying in a hospital bed. It's a lot of work for me to produce and publish one of these movies, and the reward for me is giving you people who can't get out on the water a chance to get out there in a virtual way and maybe brighten up your day a little. My clock is ticking too, and it's only a matter of time before I'm lying right there in the bed next to you. So maybe someday we can watch one of my movies together. But I want to take this opportunity for the first time to give a shout out to the people who watch my stuff on YouTube. I tell a few people that I know personally about my videos if I think they might be interested. Otherwise, I pay zero attention. And after my first year on YouTube, I told maybe 15 people about them. And I assumed they would tell maybe 30 other people, and they would tell 60 more. And like most everybody else, I thought my movies were so great that they'd have millions of viewers and become really famous. And like most people, that didn't happen. And after the first year, I told maybe 15 people about them, and I had a total of maybe 12 viewers who ever watched. There's a way you can track that on YouTube. And there's a way to comment on YouTube about other people's videos, and a way I can respond to comments made about my own videos posted there. And I think I may have promised to reply to the first comment made about one of my videos, but I never did that. And furthermore, after more than 5 long years, I've never once even so much as checked on YouTube again to see if anyone else ever watched a single one of my videos that I posted there. And there's a way on YouTube to comment about other people's videos, and a way I can respond to comments made about my own videos posted there. And I think I may have promised to reply to the first comment made about one of my videos, but I never did that. And furthermore, after more than 5 long years, I never once even so much as checked YouTube again to see if anyone ever watched a single one of the videos I posted there. I don't care who watches them. I'm not trying to be popular. And my advice to anyone watching this episode, if you're still young enough and physically able to do it, is to shut your computer off right now. Get off your fat butt. Turn off the virus news channel on your TV for a few hours and get out there on the water and breathe some clean air and listen to the birds. Don't sit there on your fat butt watching this stupid video. But by this point, I realized that there are people out there who watch them, and I want to take a few moments out here to at least acknowledge their existence and take a little look back upon the past and a little look forward toward the future. I'm not trying to be insulting when I say to the rest of the YouTube audience that I couldn't care less whether you watch or not. What I mean is that this whole Basstravaganza concept was just a grand experiment to me, to see if I could take a piece of wood and whittle it into something a fish might bite on, and buy a little camera and teach myself how to shoot video, and buy some cheap software and learn how to edit video into something that other people might want to watch, and then teach myself how to publish it. And it took me years, but I did that at least to my own satisfaction. I was never interested in being popular. I wanted to learn how to make lures and make movies. It took me a huge amount of time and effort to craft lures and shoot the video and edit it out for publication. And I didn't have any energy left to devote to people that I'd never met, whether they were fans or haters. So as I mentioned previously, the Basstravaganza concept came to an end a few years ago. I don't shoot new fishing video. I don't go out bass fishing anymore. I don't make bass lures, and I don't make lures at all. And I rarely even go out fishing at all the past couple of years. So now I want to move on to produce something that I do want other people to watch, and something that's not narrated by an idiot like Humpty Dumpling. So I'm hoping to evolve into something new and different, and learn how to use to share ideas and opinions and feedback with other people I've never met. But if I ever make it to that stage, the finished product probably won't be about fishing, and it certainly will not be about bass fishing. Hopefully it'll be about larger issues like watershed health and land use policies. So if it makes any sense for common people at my level to even have a plan anymore, that's mine. Fishing will be a part of it, but it won't be about that dimwit Humpty character chasing after bass. However, I'm still left with this huge archive of raw video that I shot under the old Basstravaganza concept, and some of it is really good. I went to a lot of effort to shoot it, and I want to publish some of it. I want to continue delving into that archive, but I want to make it clear to viewers here that the Basstravaganza is in the past tense now. So even though I never check YouTube to see if anyone loves or hates me or even watches my stuff, there's a way for people to reach out to me here. And I would occasionally get emails from people I don't know. I even have followers on YouTube now, even though I don't even know what that means. And I basically do not respond to them either. I thought I had deleted most of the messages I had received from them through YouTube, and I thought that I may have received like 15 or 20 emails in total. But one aspect of the COVID New World Order is that a lot of businesses are struggling, even some big businesses, including my old email server. After many years, they just could not seem to maintain any customer service after COVID, and I was forced to move to a new email address. So before terminating my old email address, I made a point of browsing through all the old incoming emails that I had never deleted, just to send a note out to anyone who cared to keep in contact with about my new email address. And after deleting all the spam, I was shocked to find out that I was left with maybe 30 emails from people reaching out to me through YouTube, even though I was sure I deleted most of them. And when I returned a couple hours later, there was a new email in my inbox. I assumed that it was spam too because nobody I know ever uses that old email address anymore. But when I went to delete it, I noticed that it was a new email from YouTube from someone I'd never met with a comment about my Octwatch episode that I had posted so long ago. Now, YouTube being what it is and the world being what it is, I automatically assume that the first three words in any comment I receive through YouTube will be "you effing a-hole." So I basically delete them all without reading them. But there was only room on the screen to see the first four words in their message. Greatest YouTube video ever. So just to maintain my policy, I deleted that message too without reading any further. But it's nice to know that there are really people out there in cyberspace watching my stuff, and at least one person liked my movie. But I don't know how to reply to YouTube comments, and I don't want to take the time to learn how. So if I tell people that I don't care whether they watch or not, it's not that I'm trying to be rude or insulting. I'm just too busy keeping my own head above water nowadays, and I don't want to get involved with internet chatter while I'm struggling to keep my own car on the road and keep my own body on the road and keep my own boats ready and safe to get out on the water. That said, I do want to take a moment out to try to respond to one person who tried to contact me a few times in the past. I've forgotten your name now, but I remember you were associated with some entity called Explicit Fishing. The problem is that I don't know how to reply to comments I receive through YouTube, and your Explicit Fishing seems to be on Twitter or Facebook, and I don't Twitter, and I don't Facebook, and I don't text, and I don't even have a cell phone. So I don't know how to reply. And I don't want to post my own email address onto YouTube because I don't want a bunch of yahoos bugging me. There are a number of reasons I'm trying to reach out to contact you here. First, you said you were Aboriginal. I've known a few Aboriginal recreational fishers over the years, but only a very few, and it would be interesting to hear your point of view about that in general. And also because you said you were a carver and also a bass fisherman, and also that you made your own lures. So I'm sure we'd have lots to talk about, and yes, it would be great to run into you sometime on a lake somewhere, but that's increasingly unlikely. It's not just that I don't go bass fishing anymore. These lakes that used to be my favorite fishing spots in the whole world have degenerated into places where I don't even think of going fishing anymore. Nowadays, they're just slush pits swarming with a dog's breakfast of invasive species. Bullfrogs, yellow perch, milfoil, largemouth bass, bullheads, flag iris, and swarms of giant carp. And maybe the most invasive of all are the truckloads of hatchery trout that compete directly with whatever remnant remains of the original wild trout that once lived in those lakes. To me, they're more like crazy science experiments now than recreational fisheries. How many weird exotic species can we dump into one water body, and what will happen next? There's no realistic capacity on the part of government to deal with the real issues, the continuous decline in water quantity and quality and the swarming invasive species that are causing the decline in the fisheries I used to love. The only response by the province to maintain a recreational fisheries in these lakes is to dump in another truckload of hatchery trout and call it good. So if we ever do meet up on a bass lake sometime, let's say howdy, but if that ever happens, I probably won't be fishing. I'll be out shooting underwater video or taking water samples. The original Basstrava concept was intended to promote the bass fishery here that was sustainable, world-class wild recreational fishery compared to the ongoing extinction and habitat disaster that's happening all around in terms of wild salmonids. That disaster is still happening all around, but the world-class bass fishery is not, so it's time for me to move on. And I've done that. Last year was probably the first time since I was maybe 8 years old that I did not catch a single bass, and this year is the second, and maybe next year will be the third. But life goes on. It's not the first time I changed the course in my life. If you watch the next episode, you'll see that I swore off fishing with pyramids for 5 years. Well, I think by next spring it might be 5 years since I made those comments, so Maybe it'll be time for me to go out chironomid fishing again next year. So let me make a vow right here on YouTube. I won't go out bass fishing again until I catch a trout on a chironomid. Here are a few topics I'd be interested in discussing if we can ever get into contact. First off, when I said that I was no longer shooting bass fishing video, I did not mean to imply that changes in the regs had caused the bass to go extinct if there were no more big bass out there to catch. And I was definitely not suggesting that other people should abandon bass fishing. My opinions about lake ecology are too complicated to go into in detail, but to be brief, I would expect that changing the regs to help encourage fishers to slaughter as many bass as they can will kill off most of the bigger bass, but not most of the bass. The big bass are what used to eat the smaller bass, and the sunfish, and the perch. So the end result might be way more total bass in the lake and much greater competition for the trout in the lake. Personally, I had evolved into a very specialized corner of the bass fishing world. I had become a trophy hunter, plain and simple. I was only looking for big fish and only on topwater hits, so it took a lot of big fish to make it worth my while to get out on the water at 4 a.m. and chase after them. I was making bigger and bigger lures while the province decided in favor of smaller and smaller bass. It's not that I don't think there are any bass left to catch. It's that the lakes themselves are going to hell, and fast. And I prefer to remember them as the superb bass and trout fisheries that they were over the previous century, not as the slop fest of invasive species they are now. For anyone who still fishes there, good for you. Any day on the water is a good day, in my opinion. And I'll probably be right out there beside you when I get too old and crippled to go out anywhere else. But when you get older, you start to realize that your fishing days are numbered. And I don't want to waste mine fishing out on a slush pit full of carp and bullfrogs and runted bass while I still have a chance to get out and explore elsewhere. Number two, in regard to your comment about making your own bass lures, even though I don't make realistic lures to fool bass anymore, I'd often thought about making a fishing lure with an aboriginal motif, in the style of the critters you might see up on a totem pole. I don't know a traditional pattern to use as a model, maybe a trout or a stickleback, and I could use some advice on that. It wouldn't try to be a great bass lure, but the bass will bite on anything that moves around their spawning beds, and it would be fun to fool them with a lure based on an aboriginal motif. Even more interesting to me would be to try to recreate some traditional aboriginal lures. One of my previous episodes, I mentioned a book written by Hilary Stewart, who has now passed on. I'd love to recreate some of the lures she showed me in her book. Take them out on the ocean and try to catch fish on them. That might even get me inspired to shoot another fishing episode. Another little project I was fooling with until it got derailed during COVID was building a fly rod out of native Van Isle wood. I love working with cedar, and 98% of the cedar I ever worked with here was red. But for a period during one of my previous lifetimes, I worked at a sawmill, and at times I was both a sawyer and a lumber grader, and for a year or so we sawed yellow. And we exported clear, old-growth yellow cedar all over the world, and I gained great respect for that yellow wood, too. It's much stronger than red. So I decided to experiment with building a hexagonal fly rod out of clear, old-growth yellow cedar. I tested it out, and I actually caught a few trout on it. And in the process, I also gained a tremendous amount of respect for bamboo. There's no comparison between the fiber strength of that plant compared to any other wood or any other plant fiber I've ever seen. and no chance I can see of building a rod out of any kind of wood that will compare with bamboo for weight to strength ratio. Well, that's a good sign. Just testing out my new homemade wooden fly rod, just trying to get the line in the water. Before I could get the line in the water, I caught a fish. But that doesn't mean I don't want to do it. I kept testing my homemade yellow cedar rod with longer and longer casts until it finally snapped. So you obviously need to increase the taper if you want to make a yellow cedar rod that's even able to make a decent cast. I'd like to fool around with wood rods again. I have a little piece of Doug fir that I want to try next. I was using the free community wood shop that used to be run by the city here. I love working with wood, and I love to use all those fine woodworking tools and machines, but I sure don't want the hassle of owning them and looking after them. But the government service went down for COVID, along with a lot of other things here and everywhere. Maybe it'll come back to life someday. It was a great community project, and got to meet some fine people there. Woodworkers. Here's another Aboriginal relation fishing project that I'm interested in. In the course of exploring around Kennedy Lake over the years, I came upon the remains of the Aboriginal fishing weir that was used to control the fish, not to mention the seals and sea lions passing in and out of Kennedy Lake. I'm very interested in researching this old weir and documenting other similar weirs around Van Isle. I'd love to participate in building up a public database that documents the location and history of this traditional fishery. It was so much more advanced in terms of sustainability compared to the madness that's going on with salmon harvesting today. In regard to your comments about putting a minimum size limit of 16-inch on smallmouth bass, I agree with the concept, although I might suggest raising that minimum up to 17 or even 18 and encouraging fishers to kill all the smaller ones if you want to promote the hatchery trout. But that's getting way off course from the subject that this Basstravaganza video series was intended for. It was never intended to be about bass fishery management. The province's policy was always the same for the entire 50 years plus that I've been fishing here. Let the bass go if you're fishing during the spring spawn. And I shot all of my video under the assumption that that policy remained the same. This series was intended to be a tribute to what was, for me, the only relatively stable trophy class wild fishery left on this side of Van Isle. The bass were and still remain a tremendous potential threat to other watersheds, but that threat never materialized much here on Van Isle. After a century of smallmouth bass here, no one ever transplanted them into water that contained wild anadromous fish. So they were never an issue here for wild salmon or sea rum trout. It was a fishery I could feel good about in comparison to the global environmental salmonid catastrophe that I see happening all around me in respect to the other 99% of the lakes and rivers on this island. I don't want to change course here and get into an extended discussion about bass fishery management. Maybe I'll discuss your suggestion a little bit further at the end of this episode if I have time. Meanwhile, we're world leaders here in terms of wild salmonid extinction, and we're playing for keeps here on Van Isle. If humans vanished from the face of the earth tomorrow, it would still take another 1,000 years before Mother Nature could rebuild the channels and pool riffle structure that existed here prior to clear-cut logging and urban development, and regrow a forested landscape that would allow for critical summer flows like the ones that existed here for the past 10,000 years prior to current forest and watershed management policies. And that kind of permanent damage is continuing as I speak, regardless of global warming or ocean drift nets or other factors. We've evolved into an economic and political mindset that is immune to being held accountable for the long-term impacts it imposes on streams and lakes and wild fish. Finally, I want to toss out another one of my crazy ideas. It's not directly related to bass fishing or Aboriginal fishing, but more towards anyone else who likes to fish but can't get out to do it. I had a brief career in the gillnet herring fishery. 23 hours in Clackwood Sound and about the same off Denman Island. But it was long enough for me to gain tremendous respect for those 25-foot aluminum herring skiffs. I'm personally still able to crash through the bush and stumble around on rivers, but that part of my life is coming to an end, and it already has for a lot of people that I know. Their future in fishing, if they have one at all, will be sitting down. So my fantasy is to buy an old herring skiff, cut the bins out, weld in 6 or 8 swiveling platforms where you could secure wheelchairs. Then you could truck the skiff on a trailer out to Elk Lake or wherever and meet up with 6 or 8 disabled or elderly people and roll their wheelchairs into the boat, lock them into the platforms on the skiff and take them out fishing or bird watching, or just take them out for a cruise around the lake and get some fresh air and a few hours away from the TV and the computer. So these are some of the directions I hope to head into in my video future, not in the direction of making movies about bass fishing. And I'd like to learn myself how to interact with a larger audience, just like I learned myself how to create lures that caught fish and how to run a GoPro. So for Mr. Explicit, if you can find a way to send me an email through YouTube, please do so, but please include your own email address or phone number where I can reach you, because I'm a primitive savage when it comes to Facebook and Twitter, and I'm old and I hardly even know anyone who's familiar with those formats. So phone and email are the only ways I know how to communicate. And if there are any other fans or haters out there, please wait for my next YouTube channel. Don't waste your time right now. I don't want to take time out of my life to chatter about homemade lures right now, or to get into extended discussion about watershed issues that I often bring up. Just wait for me to start publishing whatever comes next after the Basstravaganza, when I do hope to start responding to comments from the general public and join into the endless argument about fisheries policy. Then we can square off and you can call me a jack-offs and let the bot battle begin. Meanwhile, my immediate issue is that I want to continue publishing some of the old video that I shot under the old Basstravaganza concept. And if I ever get around to publishing any of the bass fishing, please remember that it was shot back in the days when I still thought that smallmouth bass were being managed as a recreational game fish, not as a pest. In the next 2 episodes, they're not going to be about bass at all. The next one is already done, and it's about fly fishing for hatchery trout in the interior. It certainly won't be about my skills in regard to that fishery. There are already 1,000 TV shows out there better than anything I could produce on that subject. They're more about the enjoyment and, dare I say, enlightenment that even a novice like me can get from going out on the water to try it out, and the memories of individual special moments that happened then. That was the hardest struggle I ever had, producing an episode. And it's not a great episode. The hardest part was deciding what to cut out and how to condense 4 or 5 years of interior trout fishing into one single episode. It drove me crazy. And the editing is also mostly finished on the episode after that. It's going to be about brown trout fishing in the Cowichan River here on Van Isle with spinners, and then later with some of my primitive attempts to fool them into biting on a few of my homemade topwater bass lures, converted into single barbless for that river. So I want to add a few more comments here. Another way that the decline of the trophy bass fishery lakes impacts me personally is that it was so close to home, and now it's a long run for me to find another wild fishery that interests me. As I mentioned in previous episodes, almost the entire southeast quarter of Van Isle, outside of a few lakes along the island highway, is private property and owned by clear-cut loggers and managed with a goal of cutting down as many trees as fast as possible and loading the logs onto ships for sale in other parts of the world, and then probably selling off the land as new subdivisions. It's a landscape of endless clear-cuts. The rivers that run through it are almost dead, logged off, washed out, shriveled up, fished out. And access to the lakes is mostly prohibited to the public, so it works out for both of us. They don't want me or most anybody else who lives here on their land, and I don't want to go there. And the public lakes along the highway are now basically commercial fisheries for factory fish with gene stocks not from this island. So the result is that finding the kind of fishing that I enjoy becomes largely a matter of driving outside of the old Dunsmuir land grant zone. So this is my choice, and I'm not trying to sell anyone on my fishing preferences. I'm just pointing out that without these local bass lakes where I used to spend so much of my time on the water, fishing becomes much more of a challenge for me. Quesnel Lake was just 17 minutes from my driveway. I used to go out there, catch a trophy smallmouth, and be back home sipping fresh, hot coffee before Leave It to Beaver came on TV in the morning. It's still 17 minutes away, but I don't fish there anymore. And for me now, just to get to a place where I might want to fish is a 3-hour drive or 4 hours each way. So fishing has become a big expedition for me this year. And I found out the hard way last summer about some of the complications involved in this new lifestyle. This is a huge island, and there's still a lot of it that's never seen. So I decided to use the COVID lockdown when we were not allowed off the island as an excuse to get out and explore some of these places I'd never been. Last spring, I was going bonkers after hardly getting out on the water during the first year of the COVID shutdown. When we were finally allowed to travel up island again, I went out for a gorgeous morning run around Mushalat Lake in my pontoon boat. It felt wonderful after a winter of sitting around. I was planning to go back out trout fishing, but I wanted to go for a hike first, so I left my pontoon boat tied to the dock and drove up the valley to a spot on the Octwanch River where I had documented massive fish habitat degradation caused by clear-cut logging in a previous episode. My God, there's a special place in hell for the people who trashed this river. I drove down a dead-end logging road to a spot where a fresh slide was delivering many truckloads of fresh gravel into this trashed watershed that's already smothered under acres of gravel washed in from logging. I stopped at the top end of the slide, planning to hike down and film it, but when I turned the key to move the car into a better parking spot, it would not start. My faithful old Volvo was dead in the road, and my boat was 5 kilometers away at the lake, and I was miles from nowhere during the heart of COVID. And my life suddenly changed from bliss to crisis. There was no possible way to get out of there without the assistance from people I had never met, and I'm really uncomfortable asking strangers for help during COVID. So I had no choice other than to start walking and hope to meet up with people who could help me out. After a half hour of hiking, I made it back out to the main road when a car finally came along. I had my virus mask on, but it was an awful feeling to have to flag him down and tell him my story. As I was told later, during the entire first year and a half of the COVID plague, when it was raging in Nanaimo and Victoria, there was only one suspected maybe case of COVID in the Mawachat Reserve and 0 in the town of Gold River. But I had no choice but to try to flag down a stranger in the middle of nowhere and tell him the truth. I came here from the big city where the plague is raging, and you might catch some horrible disease and die a miserable death just by opening your window to talk to me, but I really need your help. Think about it. Would you have stopped to help out a random stranger in the middle of nowhere during the heart of COVID? It's a testament to all the people that I ran into over the next couple days that every single one of them went out of their way to do everything they could to help me out of a desperate situation. Another example of why I like living on this island, even if I do whine and snivel about all the clear cuts. So it turned out this guy was Aboriginal and just taking a drive out from the reserve down the road. I guess that would be the Mawachat Reserve. The next 2 days are just a blur in my memory, and I don't remember his name or anybody else's who came to my rescue. So let me just take this opportunity to say thank you again. It was a long walk ahead of me if you hadn't stopped to pick me up. So he gave me a ride on to Gold River, and there were things just starting to open up again, and there was one motel open, although it didn't have any customers yet. So he dropped me off there, and I got a room and access to a telephone. I suspected that the problem was a fuel pump relay, so I phoned down to order a new one, and they had one in stock, but they could not ship the part up to me because now that the pulp mill is shut down after they creamed most of the old growth forest, Gold River is almost a ghost town, and there's no courier service there like Purelator or Loomis. But the motel lady knew of a local guy who did personal delivery service, and I arranged for him to pick up the part for me the next day in Port McNeil. She also got me connected with a local tow truck guy who agreed to drive way out in the bush to retrieve my car and pontoon boat. It wasn't a tow truck, it was a big flat deck with a winch that would drag your dead car up onto the back of the truck. So we went back up to the Octawance River, loaded up my old Volvo, and then back to Mouchalot Lake, where we loaded my pontoon boat on top the car, on top the tow truck. It was a miracle that I was able to get it all organized and make it happen. And I can't begin to describe the stress I felt that day, having to ask person to person for all the help people gave me, or the stress they must have felt dealing with a total stranger from the city during the heart of COVID. So I had the boat tied down on top the car, on top the tow truck. I had the part ordered, and now all I had to do was go back to my motel room, watch the Blue Jays game, and wait for my part to arrive tomorrow. And never meet another person close up and worry about spreading the plague. When I finally got the boat tied down, it was such a huge feeling of relief after a day of worry and stress. Like a huge weight lifted off my back. Such a relief that I did what I've done 100 times before. I hopped off the back bumper of my car after tying down the boat. But under the stress of the moment, I forgot that the car was not on the ground anymore. It was up on the back deck of the tow truck. So I jumped off into space. And 1 second later, I crashed onto the gravel really hard. The entire right side of my body was a mass of pain, and I could barely get up and walk. From absolute bliss to horrible pain in 1 second. So the tow truck guy drove me back to the motel, and by the next morning I couldn't walk. The motel lady knew a medical clinic there, and she drove over to get me a pair of crutches. My hip hurt the worst, and I was worried about being able to walk again. So eventually the courier guy came with the part, and the car started, and I drove on back home. And now that I had crutches, my hips started getting better, but my back still hurt. So all this actually happened before I finished the final edits on my previous Basstravaganza episode about Alice Lake, during which I had already included a little segment showing the x-ray I had taken years ago in regard to my scoliosis. So how ironic is it that before I could even publish that episode onto YouTube, I ended up getting my second ever back x-ray. You can see here that while I fell off the tow truck, I put a lot of pressure on my rib cage. The top 2 ribs handled the stress, but the next 3 snapped off right next to my backbone. So I went out to Mouchalot Lake with a fly rod and ended up with a broken back. And in addition to the COVID shutdown, that slowed down my fishing for a while last summer too. So when I got to feeling better again, I made another trip north along with an old friend, and I got out on a wonderful float trip. I launched onto Benson Lake and floated down out of the lake into Benson River, and then on down through Kathleen Lake and down out of Kathleen Lake to where the outlet heads down the river towards the Devil's Bath. That's right in the middle of that, past the Narrows actually, is that little islet. Right off the river mouth is on the left. You can see how the glacier pushed along here and just scraped that wall right clean. And looking down the lake, It's the main body of the lake. The outlet is actually in the side there. You can see where the glacier got pissed off over there and just came along and like sliced the side of that mountain there like you'd take a slice out of a piece of birthday cake. So don't mess with the glaciers. So it came to be a question of the limestone versus the glacier. And the glacier eventually lost, but not before. Look at that. What a world. That's a different kind of place there. But no summer steelhead up there. You can see I've got company here. Hey, come on, it's cool. It's all cool, Daddy. Oh, we're both fishermen, right? Come on. Catch and release, right? We know the score. If I had telephoto zoom, I could see if you had single barbless talons. I'm not sure about that. I didn't fish much, but I got to see some fine country. The highlight of my summer was not fishing, it was stumbling upon this magnificent grove of huge ancient red cedars at the outlet of Benson Lake. I hope they don't get harvested along with the rest of the forest on this island. Well, let us have a toast. Made it up to a place what I mentioned was one of my fantasies, and here I am. So right around this corner is the outlet of Kathleen Lake into the Benson River and down to the Devil's Hot Tub and all sorts of weirdness down there. So unfortunately I'm gonna have one sip. I can't stay long, or within like 30 more seconds, no matter how much beer I drink, the amount of blood I'm losing to no-see-ums and black flies and mosquitoes is going to be more than I can drink. So I have to get back out on the water. But what a great spot. But when I got back to the Mother Volvo and loaded out, I happened to knock a wire loose when I was loading my oars into the car, and it happened to be the wire to the other fuel pump relay, and it was getting dark and my car wouldn't start. So I decided to head back home with my friend, and again I had to arrange to haul my car out of a desperate situation during COVID. I ended up renting a truck and trailer from U-Haul. Here you can see me back up at the Benson River Bridge, loading the car onto the trailer. One of the loggers driving by stopped to help me. Again, thanks a lot. I don't have a problem with the guys driving the logging trucks or working up on the mountain. I used to be one myself. Or maybe nowadays I should say guys and gals. My issues are about how they log and where they log. Anyway, I made a third trip up island later with the same friend, and I happened to run over a screw on the island highway north of Comox and got a flat tire. So it just goes to illustrate some of the issues I have to deal with if I'm fishing far from home, as opposed to going out in the morn and catching and releasing a big smallmouth and getting back home in time to watch Beaver to Lever.